Hurt people hurt people. And my whole ancestry is hurt people. The hurters and the hurt, the oppressors and the oppressed. And who am I? The child of enslavers and enslaved, the descendants of the sellouts and the targets. I didn't come from white people. I came from the descendants of those who were not good enough to be white, and the indigenous people who married them, and the enslaved people who didn't have a choice. But somewhere along the way, my people decided we were capital W white with a trademark white. So we have rights, white. So you give us jobs and land and homes and potatoes. Holy shit, my entire ancestry is just people trying to survive and stepping on anyone in the way so they could. How do I hold space for the dichotomy of my ancestry? The enslaver and the enslaved, the colonizer and the indigenous landkeeper, the Irishman, the Scot, and the whiteness. They embodied the abandonment of their heritage. Everyone that made me either gave up who they were willingly or was forced to do so. Who am I? A patchwork of trauma and lost heritage. Hi, welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Naomi, and this is Mosaic in Progress. Today's episode is entitled Hurt People, Hurt People. I say this all the time in the podcast. The discussion of how traumatized people cause further trauma to other people. And today's episode is going to center around how I was a hurt person who hurt people. I'm very ashamed of it. And because this podcast always centers around healing trauma and putting shame into the open so that it is no longer shameful, we're going to talk about it today. It was a very uncomfortable topic for me. But I have been following for a while, and if you followed me for a long time, you know that for a long time I've been following many creators who are very outside of what is my normal social sphere. And I stumbled across a creator a few months ago, and her name is Chamika House Osuya, and I'm pretty sure I butchered that name, but it's Osuya, house-Osuya. And if you are a white person, follow her. Period, full stop. Like, not like, if you're a white person who's trying to dismantle your race. No, if you're a white person, go follow her. Period, full stop. Because she's going to make you uncomfortable, and you need to be uncomfortable. And I fully believe this. As white people, we need to be uncomfortable about race issues, about racism, about how we show up in the world. And her posts challenge you to that. And I would challenge you not just to go follow her, but to subscribe so that she is actually compensated for her work. If you've been following me for a while, you know that I've been unemployed for 7.5 months at the time of this recording. By the time you listen to it, it's going to be like 8 months. But as soon as I start getting the paychecks in, I'm going to subscribe to her because she deserves compensation for her work. And we've gotten really, really lax about that idea in society of compensating people for their work. We have so many people who are doing work with educating on race or spirituality or trauma healing or whatever, and we just consume their content and say, oh, that's enough. That's enough for me. And people aren't compensated fairly for the work that they do. So don't just go follow her, go subscribe to her so that she gets compensated. She will sometimes post questions from people, specifically white people, typically, who are trying to work through some of their internalized racism or situations they're dealing with, whatever. I sent in a question and it's been taken down. I was going to share it on my page, but it's been taken down now, and I think she leaves the questions up for a week or two and then takes them down. But I kept going back and reading the comments on the post, and I got called out in the deepest and most kind, honestly, way that I could have been called out. The thing that bothered me the most was that no one was insulting me. And I say bothered me because that's what I'm used to in online forums and online discussions, is people being like, you're a bitch or whatever. And people were like, wow, you're really racist and ignorant. And they didn't just say that. They backed it up with evidence. And so many people over and over and over and over were like, of course she's centering herself. Of course she's centering herself. Of course she's centering herself. And I was actually going to read the message that I wrote, but my phone is dead. So to summarize, I was talking about, because I had seen on several posts, not just in this content creator's posts, but in multiple posts, I keep seeing over and over again, you have black DNA because your great-great-grandfather or whoever was a rapist. And that triggered me a lot. And I was like, what do you mean my great-great-grandfather was a rapist? Why are you not saying my great-great-grandmother was a victim of rape? Like, how dare you diminish her and her role in my ancestry? That was essentially my message. And I got called out. And repeatedly the message that was in the comments was that I was centering myself. I was centering myself. I was centering my trauma. I was centering myself. And I sent that message because I wanted to learn. And there are people who aren't going to believe me when I say that, and I'm not going to argue with those people because it was truly upsetting to me. It was something that I was struggling with a lot. As I have viewed the comments and seen over and over again, of course she's centering herself. Of course she's centering herself. There was one person specifically who said she's taking on the emotional labor that isn't hers. She's trying to do the emotional labor that is for Black people. Her emotional labor is to work through the fact that her great-great-grandfather was a rapist, not that her great-great-grandmother was raped. I sat with that for a long time, of that dichotomy of the rapist and the victim of rape. And the thing that I came on the outside of it with is that I was a hurt person who was hurting people. I say it all the time. I said it in my last episode, hurt people. And I was a hurt person hurting people because instead of coming to the conversation as a white person, I came to the conversation as a victim of rape. And I hurt the conversation because I didn't want to engage in proximity to the person who contributed to me being here. And that's a really hurtful thing to try to engage with. And I know this even more personally because my father was a pedophile. I know my father was a pedophile because I was one of his victims. And I know of at least one other victim. This is a problem that we have a lot in general in society, but especially white people, is that we don't want proximity to the pain that was caused. Especially if we've, like, quote, done the work. Well, I've worked on things a lot, and I'm worked on my racism and, deconstructing and whatever. Okay, but you're still part of the problem. When we view the world through trauma, we center ourselves. And I should have held your hand before I said that, but healing from trauma is a really messy process. And so often as we're doing like the intensive work of healing, we're still viewing the entire world through our trauma glasses. We have to take those off when we're looking at societal issues that are not specific to that issue. If you've been a victim of pedophilia, you can keep your trauma glasses on when we're talking about pedophilia in society. I'm not going to tell you to take those off. But when we're talking about racism, you need to take those glasses off because that perspective doesn't have a place. And I'm saying that to you and to me because I showed up in a conversation about racism with my sexual assault glasses on. And I'm ashamed of that. I'm embarrassed of that. But we have to acknowledge that our personal healing and societal healing are not the same work. We have to be able to separate the two. And one of the things especially is being able to take accountability, because this creator, Chimika House Asuya, I'm so confident I'm saying that wrong, but I'm sorry if this is offensive. I'm just going to say Chimika. A lot of Chimika's content, when I read it, I'm like, that doesn't apply to me, or I've already worked through that. Like this, she had a post not that long ago that was, white people, why do you not want to live in black communities? And I was like, my neighborhood is predominantly black. I moved here on purpose, actually. So don't really know what to say here. And I felt like, as I read the post, I felt personally attacked. And it wasn't something that I worked through for another several weeks, maybe months. But just because something doesn't personally apply to you doesn't mean that you don't need to work through that specific topic. Because as we're deconstructing, as we're dismantling the racist ways that we were brought up, we have to acknowledge that just because something doesn't personally apply to you doesn't mean it doesn't apply to the group, the demographic. And I think women especially can understand this from the perspective of how we talk to and about men. Because you might personally know a man or be married to or in a relationship with one who is not a problematic man. But when you talk about men, you're not saying kind things. You're not saying positive things. You're talking about how problematic they are. And you're not saying that to whoever you're with specifically, your friend or partner or husband, whatever. And you don't mean them specifically. But the thing is, when you are part of a demographic that is problematic, you're problematic. You can't ride your laurels of being the nice guy or the nice white person or whatever. You have to acknowledge that you're part of the problem. It doesn't matter if you're engaging in the behavior specifically. There are people around you of your same demographic. You are surrounded by them constantly who are comfortable being shitty people around you. Period. Full stop. I mean, you're a white person, you're a man, you're whatever. There are people of your demographic who are shitty people, whether they're racist or sexist or whatever, and they are comfortable being shitty people around you, and you don't stop them. You don't do anything to make them so uncomfortable that they won't around you. And maybe you are. Maybe you're one of the very, very rare few. But more often than not, you either say nothing or you push them just enough to where it's just a little uncomfortable, but they're not about to go to HR over you or whatever. You are riding your privilege around these people. And I say that because I know I have quite a bit. More with misogyny than racism, to be fair, but I have definitely kept silent for my job or whatever. And we have to recognize that we have personal healing of our own trauma and our own deconstruction with racism and sexism and evangelical upbringing, whatever. And that is very different from societal healing and our accountability with that. And personal healing does play into societal healing for sure. And they're intricately linked. But we can't bring our own trauma into societal healing in places that it doesn't belong. I worked with someone for a long time who did a lot of work with healing and energetic healing and trauma healing and everything. And she always said triggers are information. If you are triggered by something, like I was triggered by the statement, your great-great-grandfather was a racist, a rapist, that trigger is your responsibility to unpack. It's information for you. It is not something that you carry forward into the world. It's not something that you use to inform the conversation. That's yours to unpack, yours to understand. And I made the mistake of, instead of being curious about my trigger, I carried it into the conversation. Unpacking racism is a responsibility. Unpacking sexism is a responsibility. Unpacking any of the bigotry that you have in yourself, that you were raised with, is a responsibility. You were not given that consensually, but it is your responsibility to heal it and unpack it. And there is a saying that white people came into the world with the expectation that they have certain rights, and indigenous people came into the world with the understanding that they have certain responsibilities. And I think viewing the world in that way can help a lot with unpacking the racism that so many of us were raised with, especially when it comes to not personalizing criticism. I understand this from the perspective of misogyny. I have conversations with my husband all the time about how terrible men are. And my husband is, one of the quote good men. And I'm not saying to him that he is one of the people who has caused the harm, but he is also responsible. And in the same way, we as white people need to be able to hear the criticism from Black and Indigenous people, from people of color about our behavior, and recognize that just because we're not engaging that specific behavior does not mean that we're not responsible. Because if your demographic is responsible for causing harm, even if you're not specifically one of the ones causing harm, you are responsible for stopping it. The people who are being hurt do not have the responsibility to stop the hurt. It is the people who are part of the demographic. It is on you, on us, to call out the people who are engaging in the problematic behavior. To say, hey, stop being such a racist piece of shit. To say, hey, stop being such a misogynistic piece of shit. To call them out loudly. To call them out consistently. It is our responsibility to do that. We can't do that if we're victimizing ourselves with our mentality. So we have to take off our trauma glasses and view things through our privilege when that is the topic being discussed. I am ashamed to admit that I was a hurt person who was hurting people, but I'm not going to hide that and pretend that it didn't happen. Because we can't do better if we don't acknowledge the wrong. Acknowledge what you did. Acknowledge your problematic viewpoints. Acknowledge the hurt that you caused. And do better. I'm committed to doing that. I hope you will commit to that with me. And I hope you'll join me next week on the podcast as we both continue to work on our mosaic in progress. As always, please follow me wherever you follow any creators. I'm on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. You can find all my links at linktree.com/mosaic in progress. And on this particular episode, I will link Shamika House Asuya. I really hope that I'm pronouncing that right, but I'm not confident that I am, because her work and the work of her followers was the inspiration for this episode. And if you don't subscribe to her after this episode, please consider at least giving her a donation, whatever you can. She has her links on almost all of her posts where you can send her Venmo, PayPal, whatever. She does a lot of work, and the work that she does, she mostly does for free, and she deserves to be compensated for the work that she's doing. So please consider giving her a donation, either one time or a subscription, because she's doing the good work and she doesn't have to. And yeah, I'll see you all next week on the podcast as we both continue to work on our mosaic in progress.